Hey there, this is Natalie with another video overthinking ReZero, and today I'm going to be overanalyzing what we know about the very world Natsuki Subaru has been transported into and exploring my weird theories about what some of this stuff could mean within the story. Spoiler threat level here is really low. There is stuff in this video that you won't know if you're anime only, but it's more based on things like the geography of the setting and other general world building that's kind of drizzled in throughout the series, rather than any plot points or information that might spoil future arcs. I may have to mention the names of some characters you won't have seen yet, so if you're very spoiler sensitive, then there is that. But if you're not bothered by vague references to future characters, then the stuff I'm going to be talking about should really more just enhance what you know about the ReZero world, rather than ruin any important moments or revelations that are still coming up for you. I'll be guessing at some of the ways this stuff might influence the story in the parts that haven't been written yet, but that's all complete speculation, so shouldn't spoil anything, except possibly my credibility as a fiction writer, if my ideas turn out to be way stupider than what Tappei actually does. So then, the landscape of ReZero's world. What's it like, and could it give us any hints to things that might be going on with the story? If you've seen my previous theory video about the potential for there being more people isekai'd into the ReZero world than we know about, I did already mention one important feature of the world, and that is that it has no oceans. But what I didn't also mention was that the world is flat, and rimmed with cascades, with nobody knowing what's on the other side of them. This is actually revealed in Season 1, if you overthink stuff, when Subaru claims he's from east of LAGUNA, and is told that there isn't anywhere east of LAGUNA. On a nice, sensible, spherical planet, you can always go east. Sure, if you go far enough east, you'll end up in places you'd normally consider to be west of where you started, but the idea that any place is as far east as it's possible to be doesn't exist. This would only make sense on a heretical, blasphemous flat world. Of course, that on its own doesn't tell us the world actually is flat, only that some people think there's nowhere east of LAGUNA. In a fantasy setting, particularly one with a medieval aesthetic, people not really knowing that sort of stuff wouldn't be that strange. In our own world, people thought that for a lot of history, and you can find some special people even now who believe the Earth is flat, and they're just great. But in the case of ReZero, it comes up enough times to be taken as something intended by Tappei as factual about the setting, rather than characters simply being wrong. A good example comes in Arc 5, when in crazy circumstances I won't spoil, a character believes it might be possible for them to dig all the way through the world to save themselves from an inevitable death. Surprisingly, it's actually not Subaru. The description of how this character imagines the world to be formed definitely implies a flatness, and that nobody knows what's on the bottom. This is a character who's been alive for a very long time and travelled a lot, as well as being acquainted with some of the most powerful characters we know about in the setting, and so they can reasonably expect it to have a good understanding of these kinds of basic things about their planet. There are only 4 major countries and no oceans, so the world really isn't all that big, and with all of the magic and witches and such like going around, of course there are going to have been people who've confirmed that there's an edge. The Dragon Kingdom of LAGUNA, where the main story itself has been set so far, ends in the Cascade, and so plenty of characters we know have seen it. What's also worth considering is that the world may once have been bigger, twice the size in fact. We're told that the Witch of Envy consumed half the world in the Great Calamity 400 years before the start of the story, before she was sealed. But what that means in practical terms isn't really clear. Does this mean she consumed half of the actual planet, having a permanent effect on the world's geography, or half of the living things? Maybe it means something less literal, and consumed means she shrouded it in her shadow or miasma for a time, but after she was sealed away, the land remained, albeit scarred. There's an indication of what her actions back then might have been like in Arc 4, in a bit that I'm being real vague about, but which I'm personally super excited to see in Season 2. But it's still not really clear if the very foundations of the land itself cease to exist in a Satella Breaks Bad event. It's also possible that what people think happened during the Great Calamity is not actually correct. The Witch of Envy is historically thought to have consumed the other 6 Witches of Sin during that rampage, as well as half the world. But actually, there are other causes of death for all of them that contradict that. It's possible that the world's memory of what occurred when Satella went berserk has been altered. If that sounds a bit of a reach, it's because I'm avoiding spoilers. Novel readers will hopefully understand how I'm thinking that may have happened. And anime onlys, well, just trust me that I'm not pulling the possibility of epic scale alteration of history out of my arse here. Keep the idea in mind when you're watching season 2, and you'll hopefully see where I'm coming from. So, we basically have no idea if the geography of the world Subaru arrives in is the same or different to what it was before the calamity, though we do know that the Great Waterfall or Cascade existed before Satella's rampage, so whether she consumed part of the land or not, it's not because of her munching bits of it that the world's flat. We also know that she's sealed in the northeast of LAGUNA, which is on the east of the world, so if she chomped her way there, it would make sense that any of the land she ate was previously east of there. The other thing that we know about the world is that somewhere in it is the mysterious odd LAGUNA. This is the source of magic, blessings, souls, and basically the natural laws of the world, and even those most expert in magic like Roswell don't know where it is or what its real nature or purpose is. Whether it's conscious, acting like a kind of god, isn't known, but it does seem to be the force prohibiting certain types of magic from being possible. It seems to have a bit of a Full Metal Alchemist thing going on too, not really being down with people fully trying to bring back the dead, though resurrection immediately after death is possible in some circumstances, for instance with the divine protection of the phoenix, and I bet you can probably guess which OP mad lad has that. Or even using very high level healing magic such as Felix can do, though with some serious limitations. It seems kind of logical that Odd LAGUNA would maybe be on the underside of the world then, or beyond the Cascade, given that people seeking to know truths about magic will most likely have explored all of the accessible lands over the centuries, trying to discover its secrets. Knowing all of this about the world then, we also know some things that seem incompatible with it. Things that seem just like Earth, and which don't really make sense as behaving that way given the peculiarities of the ReZero world. In a particularly lyrical chapter in Arc 5 of the web novel, presented in the voice of a character named Liliana, who's a bard, she talks about things like the waxing and waning of the moon. There are abilities possessed by certain characters that reference eclipses. Days are 24 hours long and divided into day and night phases, though time is shown using magical crystals placed on time towers across towns and cities rather than with clocks. There are months of around the same length as in our world, suggesting their moon cycle is similar to ours. Years are about the same length and made up of similar seasons, and the world is colder the further north you go. It seems odd that in a small, flat world, it would share so many of these things with our own spherical one, right down to having a single moon with the same kind of orbit and phases, and presumably a similar relationship to the one our planet has with a single sun. Now, I want to be clear here, I'm not pointing this stuff out to nitpick about the world building. In most cases, if an author wants to say that a fantasy world is flat but days and years are the same as on Earth because magic, then I honestly think that's just fine. When you're building a fantasy setting, unless you're going for some kind of ultra-realistic hard sci-fi thing where the physical details of a planet may be important, usually there are some things you want to do cool fantasy things with, maybe like making the world flat with no oceans, and other things you don't want to be important in the story. So you want to just keep them the same as they are in our world so the audience can just forget about it and focus on the right things. This can be especially true in an isekai story, where you don't want the protagonist to be stuck understanding literally nothing about the new setting, or having to explain how they can even breathe in this new world's atmosphere, or why they don't immediately catch 100 illnesses they have no immunity to. Those sorts of things aren't plot holes or lazy world building. They're just affordances to allow you to create the fantasy setting you want without worrying about figuring out and explaining technical details that don't improve the story. But I don't think that's what Tappei's doing with all of this stuff. A lot of these things are mentioned when they absolutely wouldn't need to be if Tappei just wanted to create a fantastical setting with his own rules and not have anyone pay attention to the logic of those elements. I think that just like the existence of the white whale in a world that has no oceans, the incongruence of things that are like our world with things specifically chosen for the ReZero setting, are there to hint at things that will later be revealed about the very nature of the world Natsuki Subaru's found himself in. This is also likely because of the fact that the reason Subaru is there, and the relationship between this world and our own, something I've discussed in more detail in my video about isekai'd people in this setting and my video about Al, is set up to be important. We don't know what Tappei's famous 3 big mysteries are yet, but I don't think there's anybody who's into thinking about this stuff who doesn't theorise that at least one of them has to do with why Subaru, or indeed people from our world in general, are there. Basically, if Tappei Sensei really isn't up to anything with all this Earth-like stuff on a flat world, I'll eat a REM body pillow. But if we work on the assumption that he's laying the foundations so that a later reveal about the nature of the world will make sense, then what kind of thing could all of this be driving towards? Well, I think it's got to come down to the very creation of the world itself. We do know that the kind of magic needed to create a bit of land people can live on exists, because we know that Echidna, when she was alive 400 years ago, lived on a floating island she'd created. Echidna's a powerful witch, but not ranked even close to the topmost powerful beings in ReZero's world, and so if she can make an island, could something like, say, a great spirit create a whole world? It's mentioned that there is a great spirit named Oddglass who founded one of the other 4 countries, the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko. This is incidentally where everyone's favourite psychopath, Elsa the Bowl Hunter, comes from, and it's in the north and very cold. Oddglass is considered a deity there, and selects Gusteko's king, perhaps in a similar way to how Volcanica interacts with the dragon kingdom of Lagunica. Oddglass is said to be one of 4 great spirits, and so it could be possible that the kind of power something like those might have wielded may have been enough to do what Echidna did with her island on a larger scale, and create a whole world. Echidna was able to create powerful artificial spirits. Daphne could bring magical beasts into existence. If those powers of creation are within the scope of witches, and great spirits can massively surpass them, I mean, we don't know if they can, but just supposing they can, then this could be the answer to how this strange world came to be, both in terms of its geography and its first inhabitants. Of course, this would create the new mystery of where those spirits or whatever else it was that created the world came from, and why they did it. And for that, I don't really have an idea yet, though it should be based on the whole situation with people being isekai'd there, probably something to do with our world, I would have thought. But as to why so many things resemble the Earth, well, that could perhaps have something to do with where this world exists. We know that it's possible with certain types of magic to access or even create different dimensions in time and space. This is something hinted at by some of the things Beatrice can do, and she's said to know advanced forms of yin magic that have otherwise been forgotten by the world. It's probably not relevant, but Subaru's only magical affinity is also with yin magic, the type of magic that can tamper with space. The abilities Beatrice has shown do give some idea that creating, accessing and sealing other dimensions is something that's well within the realms of possibility within the magic system of this world. Echidna's capabilities may back this up once again, given how she relates to Beatrice to begin with, and the fact she's able to create and sustain the dreamlike world of her citadel. The dream citadel may not exist in its own dimension in the physical sense, given that people's bodies don't actually transfer there, so it's perhaps a stretch to talk about it as an example of dimensions. But it is an example of an artificially created place where everything that happens feels real, and where interactions can happen that do persist with their own consistency, meaning it can be said to be a reality of sorts where more than one person can share experiences. I personally think then that the ReZero world was artificially created in a dimension of its own, and that things like the sun and moon may either be fake, just representations of the sky in a world whoever created the ReZero world was familiar with, or perhaps, and this is where I'm going all in with the wild guesses, perhaps this world is in some kind of pocket dimension laid over our own world. This sounds a bit bizarre, but if the world of ReZero was created floating above the Earth, though in its own pocket of space-time where we couldn't see it, this would explain why it doesn't seem to have been too hard for people to be summoned there from our world, and could also mean that the people living there are just looking out through the boundaries of their dimension at our own sky. Maybe if they could see what was underneath their world, they'd see the Earth underneath it, kind of like the world of ReZero is a frisbee being held over a soccer ball. That's the Earth. There'd have to be some kind of weird timey-wimey stuff going on too for this to be the case, given there is some strangeness with the lore relating to the character known as Hoshin of the Wastes that suggests that either time passes faster in the ReZero world than on Earth, or that people from modern Earth can be isekai'd to periods back in history in the ReZero world. So it would be weird if we were both using the same view of the sun and moon to measure time. But with strange dimensional stuff and magic, I don't think that rules out this theory altogether. If the world does indeed exist in a dimension of its own, but looking out at our own universe, then, well, what does that mean is going on when Subaru returns by death? Are there multiple versions of this dimension that he simply skips between? Or does the strange relationship the world has with time allow it to genuinely be reset to save points in its entirety? I might as well keep going with the weird theorising at this point. So, okay, the existence of the Gospels, which show that causality is a very real concept in terms of how this world works, does seem to suggest that someone with enough knowledge could actually work out the latest point events would need to be reset to allow for a significantly different outcome. And so maybe that's what happens. Something with knowledge and power equivalent to Echidna's Book of the World is used to decide on a save point, and Satella somehow resets the world, the artificially created world in its own dimension floating above the Earth, to that point whenever Subaru dies, because she for some reason knows Subaru's going to be the key to something. It could be that the save points then really are basically checkpoints identified in causality, and Satella or whoever controls this is able to roll back reality to them, controlling it as if it were actually a simulation. In any case, if this wild guessing about the world is partially or even completely correct, it doesn't really answer the question of why ReZero's world exists in the first place, or what any of that has to do with Subaru, the witches, or any of the stuff in the plot, really. Still though, there are certainly all kinds of possibilities that could include this kind of reality about the nature of the setting. So I hope you've at least found some of this fun to think about. Anyway, I'd be really interested in any thoughts you have, so let me know in the comments or hit me up on Twitter. Please leave a like if you've enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. I upload new content regularly, including all kinds of ReZero stuff, as well as other anime analysis and discussion. And I'm a new channel, so I really need the love. I've also promised to record a review of the Spring 2020 anime season in an ASMR voice when I get my first 100 subs. I need 20 more at the time of recording, so definitely subscribe if you want to help make me do that weird special video. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon, and let's keep the hype strong for ReZero Season 2.